Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast retrospective on The National, where we chronicle the releases of one of indie rock's biggest names. And we're here today to talk about the most recent, for now, album in their discography. We're going to be talking about 2019's I Am Easy to Find, which follows Sleep Well Beast. Our last episode about that came out a couple of months ago. We are very sorry for the delay in this retrospective taking so long. Scheduling has been a nightmare. We have all been very busy. We tried to do our best to have this episode with the three of us, the linchpins of this little retrospective, considering Morgan also has a very strong affinity for this record. We couldn't quite do that, but seeing as the next National album, The First Two Pages of Frankenstein, is officially announced and on the way, we figured we might as well get this out of the way, talk about this record, and surely to goodness, Ryley and I have more than enough enthusiasm to give this record its due.
You and I are not going to have any shortage of things to say about this, I don't think. This
No.
is as well as being one of the most under discussed and just generally underrated and overlooked national records. It's one of the ones with the most kind of meat behind it in terms of backstory, in terms of context for the things that led to it, the things that inform it, and the things that separate it from other national albums. It's a special one, it's a unique one, and I love my vinyl of it so much. So this album it came out in 2019. It was announced early that year, and then it was released in May of 2019. I remember the entire run up to this from announcement to release
I actually do as well.
I remember it vividly like it was yesterday. I mean, this was me. I mean, it wasn't even me at the height of my national fandom, because that height kind of existed from 2013. I mean, ever since, for the last 10 years, really, it's been the height of my national fandom, really. But every time a new album is announced, a new rollout starts, it just kicks me into gear again. And I can feel it already coming on with this new one as well. But look, I've been waiting so long to talk about I Am Easy to Find. This album and me, it's only been out in the world for 4 years now, but I feel like this album is such a huge part of both my identity as someone who loves art, but also it's a record that speaks to me and that I see myself in ways that aren't true of really any other national album. I mean, there is a certain extent to which I see myself in some of the emotions that are conveyed and some of the feelings and the heartbreak in their previous records, all of which I love. But this is specifically to do with a lot of the things that conceptually feed into these songs. This is a very personal record for me. And what's interesting about it, I'm sure everyone who's a fan of the National and a fan of this record knows all this stuff, but it's important to kind of tell the story properly, is that this I Am Easy to Find by the National as a project existed as a film before it even existed as an album. In fact, what happened was in either 2017 or early 2018 at some point, Mike Mills, the filmmaker, approached the band interested in working with them on a project, on a film-related project, essentially. And together they conceptualized and realized I Am Easy to Find, which is a short film released alongside this album at the same time, starring Alicia Vikander, Oscar winner Alicia Vikander, who you can see on the front cover here, in probably the most versatile role of her career, considering that essentially the concept of the film and what it actually is the story of someone's entire lifetime, essentially from birth to death and old age, captured through fragments and moments, essentially. And it's not necessarily an artistic idea that is foreign or hasn't been attempted before or whatever, but Mills and the Nationals and Vikander's as well, because she's such an active participant in this vision of this, is realized in this very fragmentary way that the Nationals' music accentuates very heavily. And seeing the film as well, if you watch the film, where Vikander, without any attempt to make her look older or younger all that much by any degree, portrays this person essentially at every stage of life. the wonder of childhood, right? And all those aspects of growing up, and those, the things that we all experience more or less at various stages of our life that represent the passage of time. And the National soundtracking those moments with these gorgeous loose compositions that heavily incorporate human voices, and actually make the human voice the focus in a kind of almost Philip Glass-esque way that hasn't really been true of their previous music. The previous music, the key fundamental identifier relating to vocals or relating to the presence of the human voice is Matt Berninger's distinctive baritone. But with this project as well, in attempting to capture or create a kind of universality of human experience, right? The story that is being told of this one person needs to feel as universal as possible, at least through the lens that Mike Mills and Alicia Vikander and the National are able to understand it and recognize it. The presence of different human voices, of both Matt's voice, but also the presence of various women who appear on the score for the film and in the songs that score ultimately led to, that make up this album as well. The presence of different human voices, the presence of female voices, serve to be a counterpoint or a new flavor and texture and style into the Nationals' music that allows for them to expand on some of Matt's most common and well-versed themes in a different way, in a way that incorporates a different perspective, that finds a universality in those feelings, but also at the same time, simultaneously, a kind of diversity of experience as well. One of the things that's true of Matt's writing, and has been for a very long time, is that much of it is a collaboration between him and his wife, Corinne Besser. And that's true here, as it has been in any of their the records leading up to it, really. But now you have this kind of fusion of perspectives, these two people who have spent a significant portion of their lives together, writing together, often about aspects of intimate human relationships and how those change and fracture and evolve with age. And you have that actually being represented tangibly in the music itself in this new way because of the presence of the female voices, in the way that they haven't been in these previous records, right? So much of this album and these songs do echo and build on some of those themes of the movie, of the fundamental experiences of growing up, and the shattering of innocence and the aging and the experience of heartbreak and the wisdom that comes with surviving all of the things that life throws at you and accumulating those survivals across years and across decades. And that stuff that's communicated in that film comes through and feels as though it has an actual audible representation in the variation of voices that you get on this album. They are all female, but they are a variation of vocal styles and also a variation of vocal ages as well. You have people who, with the greatest of respect, obviously, are a little bit older and sing with a little bit more of a wizened perspective and tone in their voice. People like Gail Ann Dorsey, for instance, who often sang with David Bowie. And you have people on this record as well, women on this record as well, who sing in much more youthful tones. People like Mina Tyndall, for instance, who bring this in very different feel to their vocal contributions as well. And collectively, between these women and Matt, you have these communications, these perspectives, this outlook, this vision of the fundamental human condition of growing up and being heartbroken and being confused and trying to exist and understand yourself through all of these different perspectives, essentially. And it is not something necessarily that the record is always lyrically explicitly focused on, but it's an underlying thing that carries across all of these songs, right? These are songs that are about the accumulations of heartbreak, essentially, the accumulations of pain and the accumulations of experience, essentially, that feed into your life the older you get. And in the way that Matt writes and in the perspectives of these songs, so much of it feels weighty, with the heft of all of those experiences and of the life lived in a way that is certainly getting truer and truer with, or seems to be getting truer and truer with each national record, right? Here, I mean, I would like to kind of go and talk about this record more or less in sequence, but I think it's appropriate to pick out certain moments to illustrate certain points. And for that, I have to kind of immediately leap in with the kind of centerpiece song, Not in Kansas, which is the most free form lyric that Matt has ever written. Essentially, this stream of consciousness, essentially accumulation of memories, of thoughts, of images, of feelings across years of Matt's life, from his childhood reaching back into the present and deeply informed by the present moment as well. For as much as this album, through the various singers and through the various topics and feelings explored, captures a diversity of experience across the human spectrum, a song like this captures a diversity of experience within a single human being across a lifetime. And in that way, Not in Kansas is maybe the song on the record that is closest to a communication of the theme of the film itself, right? That accumulation of experience and the things that make up a life, essentially, across years and across countless moments, you know, the vast majority of which will be forgotten, but the single, you know, the fragments of which stick in our mind in one way or another, and form our understanding of who we are based on all of the things that we've experienced and based on what is stuck and based on what makes us do the things we do. In the way I discuss this album in particular, I think it's probably going to be, even for me, kind of free form, because that's just kind of in the nature of what it is. This is the longest national album. This is the most languorous national album. This is frequently the most sedate national album from a musical perspective as well. There are moments where it is very animated, but there are a lot of moments where it is not, where it is very reflective, where it is very still. It is, you know, I always compare it to REM's New Adventures in Hi-Fi, because it's kind of like the double album that comes late in a band's career, like far past their critical and commercial peak, represents excess in so many different ways, and also represents them after a period of some of their most accessible work, kind of indulging in stuff that is very, you know, drawn out and kind of difficult to understand. I even think there's a direct link lyrically between the way that Michael Stipe writes on a song like Ebo the Letter and the way that Matt writes on a song like Not in Kansas. But that parallel I can revisit maybe. It is just a very dense and very messy and very eclectic record that, in doing so, captures something fundamental and profound about the experiences and accumulations that make up a life. And I'm being very abstract here, so we will kind of get into the songs themselves. And as we do that, I want to hear from you, Jake, as well. You're a slightly kind of more recent national fan than myself and Morgan, so you've kind of come in a little bit, I don't want to say green, because that kind of sounds sort of, you know, reductive and kind of not quite fair, because I know you're a huge national fan. At what point in your national fandom, I should say, then, did you come across I'm Easy to Find, and what was that experience like for you, and how does the record overall sit for you in the national canon?
Well, honestly, this is the closest I think I've actually lined up to you and Morgan, who are certainly more longtime national fans. But at this point, I was already a fan when this album came out. And I was, you know, I kind of dipped my toes into the water when Sleep Well Beast came out, but I hadn't heard all of their records. I wasn't a fully fledged devotee by that point. But at this point, I had been. And I was looking forward to this album. I remember paying attention to the lead up to everything. Of course, the Mike Mills thing was really exciting for me. Mike Mills is one of my favorite modern filmmakers. Come on, come on. Best movie of the decade so far. I was just, everything about this buzz-wise just made me excited. And then it's very odd. I remember the sort of reception to this initially happening and it being like deflating really quickly. Like, I remember everyone I knew who was like really into the National, they kept flying the flag for this album the whole time. But people who are maybe a little bit more on the fringe, maybe aren't as, devoted National fans, they're just like, eh. And honestly, this is the first time I think that, well, really, in this whole retrospective, that I think we're even remotely going against the grain, in that this is an album that I feel like has been received kind of lukewarmly, and I don't really feel like it's made that much of a resurgence since. It feels like people have stayed kind of in the middle regarding it. I feel like Sleep Well Beast maybe had a bit of an arc to it. I feel like maybe that one took a little bit of time to grow on people, and it's looked at a little bit more fondly now. Whereas this album is a bit more divisive. And from the outset, I get it on some level. And maybe this just has to do with the fact that, oh, I got to actually be here for a National album rollout and I was really excited. But I was really pulled in by everything this record was doing from the get-go. But at the same time, for as much as I appreciate this album and love it and think it's kind of deeply, deeply underrated by most people, and at the bare minimum has some spectacularly high highs, I do kind of understand the disparity here, because as you kind of alluded to, this is like a really collaborative project. Like, from the outset, you can kind of tell that it wasn't, in at least initially, intended to be an album, just because the spirit of collaboration is really alive on here. Again, all of those guest vocalists. You have Galen Dorsey, Eve Owen, Mina Tyndall, Lisa Hannigan, Sharon Van Etten's on here. You have the Brooklyn Youth Chorus is on here. Kate Stables. Like, there's a lot of different people on here. And so, for like, I even did see this alienate some longtime National fans. And I think the reasoning as to why is because this is like kind of the least National album, not just because of the presence of other voices on here, but because they're playing with a sound that I feel like is almost a doubling down of the electronic tendencies that they played with on Sleep Well Beast, which is seen as kind of the riskier, more experimental album in that 2000s and 2010s run. And then they doubled down on that again, which bands so very rarely do, and I think even more rarely do, like, successfully, at least in the eyes of their fan base. So it felt like from the get-go, this was sort of a project that was kind of designed to alienate people who were a bit more accustomed to a more comfortable and preordained idea of what a National album could even sound like. And I think that my arc as like being a more lukewarm National fan and then more of a fully fledged acolyte by the time this came out was very helpful to me, because it didn't really give me a pre-established idea of what a National album was. And I could just kind of approach this as a record on its own terms without the baggage of the indie band following it. So as I approached the music itself, I just found myself falling in love with the songs that are on here. All of the band's strengths are certainly here. Matt Berdinger's and Corinne Besser's writing is still fantastic. It's just fantastic in ways that I feel like are distinctly different. Lots of different left turns happen on here. And I will say, I think the biggest problem, just so I don't have to mention this again out of the gate, is really just the length. And it's not even really that, oh, this is a long album and long albums are inherently, but like, I don't mind the idea of a record like this. And in fact, I feel like we as people and as listeners are more geared towards an album making decisions like this, being bigger, being messier, being longer like this, and even more sedentary, like a lot of the music often is. I will say that the moments on here where they're more interstitial, the moments where are more instrumental, that are the less fully formed songs, these things don't actively harm the album for me, just because I am so used to how this flows together as a whole piece. But at the same time, I can't really deny that if they weren't here and it was just the proper songs, that the flow of the record might be improved slightly, and that trimming might actively put a more people onto it. It just adds to an already a piling on of different elements that are already kind of alienating, that just further emphasize that alienation. But look, the thing is that as a band and as a presence, artistically speaking, these guys aren't lesser than what they were before. They might be channeling it into different ways, but like when you have shit like You Had Your Soul With You, Quiet Light, Roman, actually, fuck, just really the whole first run of songs from You Had Your Soul With You to Oblivions is fucking fantastic. Like, all of these songs are great. And not to mention, this just has some of my favorite songs this band have ever made. The title track, So Far, So Fast, the closer, Light Years. These are some of the best. This is some of the best material this band has ever made. Point blank, period.
Well, also, I think there's so much about this record that is creatively risky for the National, creatively subversive, I
Very much
suppose,
so.
as well, and just deliberately doing things that veer from what are established strengths. So the National are really great at writing these mid to up tempo indie rock songs with a very clear structure and a very sort of ascendant rise, and usually a very emotional chorus. And you do get those here, but they are the exception rather than the rule. There's a lot of things that the National do on this record, and it's, you know, some of it relates to the incorporation of other voices as well, but I've already mentioned that, and a lot of it is actually not necessarily that itself. Although the focus on those alternate voices as opposed to Matt is definitely one of the biggest points that I see raised as a thing that people enjoy less about this album as National fans. But the thing that is most interesting about this record is that structurally, and I don't just mean as an album, because even as an album, it is structurally bizarre to say the least. But even within individual songs, decisions are made both in terms of how the songs are structured and how the songs are comprised musically and instrumentally that are really unusual. Like the lead single was the opening track, You Had Your Soul With You, which is just a very bizarre song. Like from those opening sort of electronic loops that are very disarming and kind of off-putting at first, into the shuffling beat that feels so start-stop and feels so kind of disorienting from Brian, to the way that the song then kind of stops and reforms into something completely different when the actual meat of it starts, to the way that the bridge itself is a completely new thing, with Gail Ann Dorsey's voice coming in and the song completely changing gears altogether, and then reforming into a kind of comprisal of its different constituent parts that have been introduced separately up to this point. It is a bizarre and disorienting song that feels as though it is, like you say, a kind of exaggeration of some of those electronic elements that are peppered through Sleep Well Beast and taken into this much more maximalist place. And, you know, when I first heard it, this song was confusing. Like, I didn't really know what to make of it. I didn't know how I felt about it. It is a strange way of opening an album, and an even stranger way of leading off a single campaign in the run up to a record as well. But in a lot of ways, it perfectly primes you for what this album is going to be, which is a series of decisions that are so unusual for this band that they could only have arisen out of a creative process that is distinctly different to any other creative process of any of the other albums that they've made. You really do. I think the record makes a lot more sense when you understand that it was created after the film was created and after the compositions you hear in the film, a lot of which are sketches of these songs. Those were created for the film in the form you hear them in the film. And then after that, they were adapted into these songs. It wasn't a matter of these songs being written and then their parts being taken apart for the movie. It was the exact opposite of that. So a lot of these songs evolved out of jams and out of instrumentals that were specifically composed to accompany the film itself. And so as a result of that, you have these songs that are compositionally and structurally are really unusual for the National. and very much feel as though this is a band taking these more exploratory pieces that they compose for this film and then attempting to craft those or impose a indie rock song structure onto them. And you know what? I love this album. I really love it. It doesn't always work. One song I think that is one of the most unusual structurally and in terms of just everything that it contains, that is a rare example of the album not quite working for me, is The Pull of You, which is
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually so many individual elements of the song that I love. I find
Yeah,
that, again,
same.
there's a lot of great drum patterns that Brian is bringing to the table on this record. Really, really inventive and kind of disorienting and swirling in a way that's satisfying. But the voices and the combinations of voices and the bizarre spoken word section and everything that this song kind of is when it tries to cohere doesn't quite work for me as a whole. But I really appreciate the bizarreness of it. I appreciate the sense of chaos within it, because it is, you know, thematically meaningful in terms of what the song is about. Which is feeling, you know, as though your entire life has been destined towards heading towards one person, and the sense of kind of chaos and lack of agency and control in the belief that you are fated to belong to someone, essentially. And so that's quite powerful. And the song is a complete kind of disarray, essentially. And I like a lot of elements of it, but it is very much reflective of the risk that the National take in making an album like this. And it's a kind of album you can only make if you have a certain degree of either confidence in the deliberate decision to eschew a lot of the tastefulness that you're associated with in terms of song construction. It's either an exercise in sheer confidence, or it's an exercise in just not caring at all about what people might think of it. And it is the kind of album you only get to make if you're in one of those two states. And either way, you have to have some kind of level of support in this creative decision to be able to get to do it and release it, because it is just so unfriendly fundamentally on whatever level you want to look at it from, in terms of the voices, in terms of the weird song structures, in terms of the length of the album. None of it is approachable really in any way, shape, or form. And to hear a band like the National, who we have throughout this series so consistently praised for the way they are able to hone these albums to a fine art, for them to essentially throw all of that out the window and just make this essential mosaic collage record is a real, like, rare thing. It's a treat if you're a fan, and it's the sort of thing that is by design not going to appeal to everyone. I don't think it's necessarily designed to alienate people as much as that is just a inevitable result of what it is that is accepted in the creation of it. And, you know, if the National didn't have many other records, or if this was early in their career, it would be a foolish move. It would be something that I would probably be less forgiving of necessarily if there were less material outside of this. But because the National have already established a very generous body of work that is so well honed and so well crafted, this is the kind of thing you actually want them to do at this point in their career.
Yes.
You want them to take these kinds of really daring risks and do these kinds of things that they know full well are not always going to work, but you do them anyway to explore the boundaries that you've set for yourself and what happens when you push against them. And so, yeah, for as much as there are occasionally moments on this record, like The Pull of You, that don't quite land for me as much, there are far more moments that do, where I am completely taken by the sheer balls of the decisions. And I want to start by talking about the ballsiest and most unusual songs, and then we can kind of round this out by talking about the most core national songs on this. So you have tracks like The Pull of You, and you also have tracks like Where Is Her Head, which is, I think...
Yeah, I was waiting for that.
Structurally, and everything about this is the most unusual song the National have ever put on an album. Particularly in the sense that what it is a 5-minute chorus and nothing else. It is a single rising, repetitive chorus that builds in intensity and recedes at a certain point and then surges and eventually fades again, of just one single vocal refrain led by Eve Owen and just going full bore into nothingness. It's a complete compositional rejection, essentially, of the indie rock song format. And it comes right at the center of this record when it starts to, again, lean into some of its most daring compositional ideas. So, Jake, I want to ask you specifically what you think of the really unusual songs here compositionally. Songs like The Pull of You, songs like Where Is Her Head, Not in Kansas, So Far, So Fast. What do you think of the songs that deliberately eschew the things the National have proven that they're good at, the format, and do these absolutely bizarre collisions of voices and weird structural choices and weird musical choices?
I'm kind of two minds about them. One is that I do think that irrespective of how strong these individual songs and risks are, compiling them together in the way that they do on this album is inevitably kind of it leads to a very just a challenging experience. I mean, like, they have Where Is Her Head and Not in Kansas right next to each other on this album. And I think that says so much about this whole experience, and that you have these two songs that really, like, just elaborate on one idea throughout their entire duration, and they're pretty lengthy songs. And they just do that, and that's for 10 whole minutes on this album. Not that I'm saying that the sequencing is, like, off. I'm just saying that innately there is kind of a fundamental issue that's not necessarily something that I hold against the album, but something that you do, it's a hurdle that you do have to overcome. And that when they lean into those idiosyncratic moments, they will often double down on these decisions and then stack them with other idiosyncratic moments next to them. And that just compounds some of the problems. And stuff like The Pull of You, for example, this isn't one of my favorite songs on the album either. Again, it has lots of individual things I like, and I do like the song overall. But, like, when you take things like the strings, the skittering drum patterns, Matt's vocals, the guest vocals, and then you just put them all together, and they have what is essentially three separate sections of the song, except with the drums as a kind of through line, it makes following this song's progression very bizarre feeling, and it's a very cacophonous song. And overall, I would say that this is a pretty cacophonous sounding album. It doesn't really have the same uniformity as even the last couple records. Even Sleep Well Beast, I think, for its strange electronic excursions, is that it still did a decent job of keeping it within its own lane. Even though it was different for what they were doing, it still felt as though it was, you know, running its own race, so to speak. Whereas here, it just does feel like that formlessness that you talked about really is a very present element in songs like Hey Rosie, also, for example, where again, it's difficult to wrap your head around why a lot of these decisions are made. But I also have to come back to the inevitable point where the muscularity of this band is still such a central kind of strength of the record, that all of these diversions with all of these things that should work against the record, they just kind of don't. The kind of collage, sort of mosaic nature of this album leads to, at least in my opinion, with multiple listens, this feeling like a more cohesive experience, as strange as that is to say, as odd as my opinion here is. And look, there are moments where I feel like this band are so used to mixing Matt's vocals with their instrumentations that the female vocalists on this album sometimes are done a slight disservice by how either present or not present, or how well their vocal harmonies might work with Matt's. And sometimes they work really well. I actually think that on Where's Her Head, Eve Owen's vocals are fucking fantastic. I love them a lot. Clive Owen's daughter, by the way, interesting bit of trivia there that I didn't know. But there are moments where it does kind of feel like them venturing outside their specific wheelhouse does yield with maybe not even necessarily a net negative on the album. It just sort of feels like for all the risks that they're taking, they're doing something well, and they're doing something successfully, but maybe not as successfully as they could. But even then, that just kind of adds to the messiness of the record. It really does feel a whole lot like the album cover. It's actually one of my favorite album covers that the band have made, just because it has that sort of monochromatic indie rock feel, but with these smears of colorful paint all over it. And that does feel like the core of the National sound, but with these smears of color that are all around it that feel like they are various levels of successful, but always kind of captivating.
Absolutely. And I definitely want to pull here and say, pull for certain songs on this record that are maybe less loved. I'm going to be particularly defensive here. There's songs that everyone loves on this album, and I think we can probably get to those last and celebrate them. But there's so many songs on here that I see being overlooked or underrated or even outright shed on. And I'm not going to get pissed off or whatever. I just want to give a really positive defense of these songs in line with the sorts of things I've been saying about what I love about this album, about how it does these things that pull away from the traditional indie rock format and essentially do something a little bit looser, a little bit more jammy, a little bit more focused on the timbres and textures of the contributors of this band, and just ringing out and spending time kind of absorbed in the space of that. Hey Rosie, I think, is one of the best examples. I mean, I just love the slow, subtle ascendance of the way the song pushes forward. And I love that Gail Ann Dorsey gets to lead it directly as well. I mean, it is... So this is specifically definitely one of the songs that Corinne contributed most to. In a lot of ways, she wrote this song to Matt, essentially, and he is the Rosie that is being reached out to here, someone who needs someone essentially to say that they understand what they're going through and that they will be there for them. And one of my favorite lyrics on the whole album, I will love you like there's razors in it, which is just
love that lyric.
Such an evocative line that is so well sold. And that's one of the things that I love so much about this album from a lyrical and thematic perspective as well, is that we've talked about how so many records that the National have made, so much of the writing that Matt and Corinne have done is a way of them working out their relationship issues, and not necessarily issues, but just kind of like the nature and dynamic of growing old with someone, and how those things change and how you need each other, but also need to veer away from each other at certain points in time as well. And getting to actualize that dynamic between two people, using the different voices, having Matt step away for periods of time on this record, adds so much weight to these songs and their power and their meaning for me. You know, knowing what Hey Rosie is about and knowing how Corinne wrote it and being able to see what the purpose of that song was for her is made so much more powerful by having it led by someone that isn't Matt, who gets to kind of actualize and bring her, Corinne, to that song in a way that's not just Matt as Corinne like we're used to. I find that really, really powerful. And I love the way the song builds with these kind of almost industrially processed drum lines that are just reverberating, and these occasional little kind of guitar twinkles that Bryce or Aaron will do that feel so beautiful when they happen more and more as the song kind of moves into its heavier sections. I love that so much. Another song that similarly I love that is much more withdrawn and restrained is Roman Holiday, which, apart from having just this beautiful little piano line that I absolutely adore, has this slow, gentle crest and urgency that just absolutely grips my heart. I love the gentle urgency in the way that the song builds both musically and lyrically. It's one of the most oblique lyrically. The primary inspiration is a newspaper column, I believe, that was written by Patti Smith, who was responding to a fan essentially asking Patty for advice on how to deal with the suicide of a friend, I believe. And there's one line that always stuck out to Matt, was this, please think the best of him. And that stuck with Matt so much as a piece of advice to someone dealing with the suicide of a loved one, that he kind of built this song around it. And, you know, it's lyrically oblique. And he talks about not being afraid to tell you what I want and not being afraid of anything, and willing to kind of be subjugated, or not subjugated, but like be used by someone else as a way of surviving, or of dealing, or of making it through something difficult. And that idea of allowing yourself to be a vessel for someone else to kind of work through their suffering, but doing it willingly, is quite a powerful thing, I think. And it's a perspective that Matt, I don't think, has taken very much in the past when he's talking about being the person who is suffering, but actually talking about, you know, he says in the first verse, I'm your hospital, I'm your silver cross, tell me what to be, tell me how to talk. Like that it's such a moving song. And I love the idea behind it so much. And it's very withdrawn and very kind of low key, so it doesn't get as much love. But and there's something about the line, there are police in the museum. I have no idea what that means. It's just evocative. It's just a lyric that is evocative. And I don't know why or what it means to me, but it gets me for some reason. I guess this idea of, you know, police in the museum probably being a metaphor for the museum being some withdrawn kind of part of your heart, essentially, that houses all of your old and difficult memories, and there's suddenly being an intrusion into that space. It just really gets me. And that's a song I think is quite overlooked for how affecting it is. Another song I think is really underrated on this record that I never see any love for is Hairpin Turns, which, like Roman Holiday,
absolutely,
has this beautiful piano line that's even more pronounced in the music video version of the song. And it's very typically, you know, in that lane of working through an aging relationship and its difficult eras. And I love the visual imagery in here. Hairpin Turns itself, as well as just being a very evocative and lyrically satisfying turn of phrase, a great name for a song. That matched with the idea of burning houses and days of brutalism, like architecture, and seeing yourself in the context of a place, I suppose, as opposed to in the context of your own life or whatever, I find really evocative and really moving. I like the kind of labored and pained way almost that Matt sings the verses here, compared to how declarative and confident the chorus is. It just adds this layer of devastation to it when he goes from, you know, kind of, you know, almost in a whiny way, talking about the old ways and thinking that he was hanging in there and having nervous throat clicks and being left in the wake of a terrifying look, to just this absolute hardline, what are we going through? It's just this sense of confronting the anxiety or the things that are left unsaid in this moment that feels really, really just gets me deep down. I mean, do you have any particular favorites in terms of the non-obvious songs in this record that really stand out to you? I guess the non-singles, I suppose.
Probably my pick for easily the most underrated song on here is, in fact, So Far So Fast.
This song has my favorite lyrics on the entire album.
It does as well, for me. The way that it describes, like in the second sort of stanza after the first, I get so far so fast, which I love the delivery of. It's so gentle and delicate, but also kind of fragile. The storm, the blackout, the quiet sea, you went running right into it, away from me. We have good friends and good houses. We have kids in the trees. Now I have nothing but sleepless nights about everything. It feels like this stanza is the entire first half of their career in one bit of writing. That entire thing, one there, just the idea of receding from the dangers of life embodied by a storm, a blackout, or the sea, where they often use like metaphors like bodies of water that are constantly referred to throughout this whole record as a kind of lyrical through line, I think, of calling back to some of their other stuff. And also the constant references to things like architecture. It really emphasizes how small you are in comparison to your environment, and the notion of, we have friends in good houses, we have kids in the trees, just the kind of communal nature of your existence within a kind of suburban environment, and the sleepless nights, the guilt about everything that your experiences, and the fucking, don't you know someday somebody will come and find you? If you don't know who you are anymore, they will remind you. We don't see you around here anymore. It's okay. I'll say your name out loud and you will be home. There's so many things that drive me crazy. What you think I am, it's never been me. Hearing your voice always saves me. Can you get away and talk to me? There's so much fucking here in how self-perception affects the character that Matt's embodying here, and how the person in his life kind of anchors him to that perception, but how it's still different from how they want him, or at least perceive him to be. And it's this feeling of displacement that I get so far so fast. You feel like you're in a state of suspended animation. It feels like a lot of the ideas that are on stuff like Boxer, for instance, where they're talking about I
was just about to say, this song to me, it feels like such a callback to songs from the Boxer era, like Slow Show and Apartment Story and things like that.
Yes.
And it's like, in that era, these were songs about this desire to escape from the trappings or the pressures of an adulthood that's getting basically to the point where it's impossible to ignore. But you're still kind of on the threshold. You're still kind of just tipping over into that space. Whereas here, so much far further along, you have kids. There's an established rhythm and routine, and there's a settling that's happened. But, still late at night, when all of that is in the distance and you're just there with yourself and with your thoughts, you're adrift. You're completely untethered from it all. And you are in desperate need of someone to be there to affirm your existence and identity. I cannot tell you how many times I have listened to that refrain. If you don't know who you are anymore, they'll remind you. I will say your name out loud and you will be home. And I've just completely fallen into myself and just completely lost it, and had so many moments of just total surrender to that. It's one of the most beautiful sentiments I have ever heard anyone express in anything. This idea,
just the power of someone's name being enough to ground them
and actualize them and home and keep them safe, essentially, through acknowledgement. It is. And it starts right from the beginning of the song as well, with that lay down the doorway in front of me and make yourself impossible for me to leave. That need to tether your reality to someone else. As someone else, you need to make you feel as though you exist. And then once they have done that, once they have actualized you, once they have said your name, you can feel as though you are real and you're alive. And those lines as well, I remember a kid in the water. I remember a world on fire. I was just coming out of it. It was so hot all summer. These very beautiful dissociative images of presumably one's own childhood, right? And the hugeness of all of that. That then be in contrast with the image of, being in a good house and having kids in the trees. Yeah, in a lot of ways, I suppose this is a song that lyrically feels the most tethered to, or most represented in the film itself as well. That idea of the passage of aging and the way in which, your childhood and your understanding of being a kid is then kind of flipped and recontextualized when you have a child of your own, and all of a sudden you're confronted with those feelings of needing to be actualized, needing to have your identity affirmed like you did when you were a kid, but in a completely different way now that you're grown. So Far, So Fast is one of my favorite National songs. It's my second favorite song on this record, and
Agree.
it exists at the end of a 3-song run that I think is the best run on this record, even though it doesn't have my favorite song in it. I think that the run of Where Is Her Head, Not in Kansas, So Far, So Fast, the three most extreme songs structurally on this record in terms of like doing things so far beyond the tasteful generic construction. I just find myself completely lost in these songs in the best way possible. And that,
Yes.
again, these piano melodies, that little loping melody in the song is just gorgeous. The way the song crests in its second half and builds into this amorphous but beautiful swell of fusions of electronic instrumentation. You can hear a little bit of the sort of weird synthesized vocal sounds that were on I'll Still Destroy You from Sleep Well Beast kind of appear again at the very end of this song. And it's like this miasma that the song ends in, this complete kaleidoscope of memories and moments and feelings that I just have this complete ascendant experience while listening to. That's to me one of the most cathartic moments of the entire record. And it's made so much more impactful as well, coming after Not in Kansas, which is this opus track where essentially Matt is driving together all of these ideas from across his life, these memories, these thoughts, these things that make him who we are in this present moment, and just letting them sprawl out in front of himself. You know, the fun thing about this song is that in its original form, it was 10 minutes longer and had like, 6 more
Whoa.
verses essentially. And Mike Mills was the person who convinced him to hone it down to what it is and to do this cool thing structurally, which is to have these interstitial chorus parts with with Gail Ann Dorsey, Lisa Hannigan, and Kate Stables doing these interpolations of the Thinking Fellers local union song Noble Experiment, which is a great song that I would never have expected this band to reference. And the central part of this record just feels like this odyssey into the human soul, if I could be a little bit pretentious for a second, and just this complete nocturnal trip through this dreamlike space where every single moment of your life is kind of collapsing into one another. And it's just so awesome, both in the sense that it's great and it inspires awe in amongst this mess of an album. And and it makes sense that the record kind of starts to, after the interstitial sound collage of Dust Swirls and Strange Light, it starts to tether itself again with some more conventional songs in the final stretch to kind of feel as though the album is kind of arriving home somewhere comfortable. But before we get to the final stretch, because I want to talk about the last 2 proper songs on this album as the final thing we talk about, because they are mine and your respective favorite songs on this record. I want to just go back again to a couple of songs we haven't mentioned from the early run of the record. First of all, particularly my third favorite song on this album, which is a song that, I'm going to be real, I actually have not been able to listen to this song since I went through a breakup semi-recently, just because it is too hard to listen to when you're in that state of mind. And I'm talking about Quiet Light, which is
yeah.
This song is just legitimately we're talking about the National here, and this is still somehow one of the absolute saddest songs they've ever created.
Yeah.
Like, this is a song about pure longing and depressive funk. I used to fall asleep to you talking to me. I don't listen to anything now. I'm so tired of thinking about everything. I'm not afraid of being alone. I just don't know what to do with my time. That fucking lyric right there is realer than anything. That shit is hard.
I'm gonna be real for a sec. I'm the exact same way with this song because this album came out right after I was in the longest relationship I had ever been in with someone for a year who lived across the ocean. And every single night I would read to her because she was 8 hours ahead of me so she could go to sleep. So when I first heard this, after, in the wake of that breakup, when I was still very much getting over it, and I used to fall asleep to the sound of your voice. I still can't really listen to that without falling apart internally. It really hurts. It really fucking hurts, man.
Learning how not to die inside a little every time I think about you and wonder if you're awake. Like, come on. This is an act of physical violence. Learning how not to cry every time.
Suing for damages, man.
Unbearable morning, but sometimes there's nothing I can do. I mean, also the musically, the song is just fucking hard hitting as hell. The drums are brutal in this song. Again, another beautiful, like the Destiners are just shitting amazing piano melodies across this album, and they're so simple. But Matt, and then the string swell at the end of this, when it just gets so like shrill and just, oh, it's skin crawling and brutal, and it is a level of completely, that's the thing, like this album is so like unrestrained for a band that are often restrained themselves to tastefulness in their expressions. And we've talked about so many of the different aspects of how this record is unrestrained and does these really unfriendly things that they would usually temper down. And this is another example where the end of the song would not be the way this song ends on any other National song. It just ends in this brutal, shrill, shrieking string sound that just curdles into this ugly ending that is just leaves you with no sense of comfort or resolution whatsoever. And the last lyric of the song as well, sometimes there's nothing I could do. It's the kind of thing that, you listen to when you want to suffer. You know what I mean? And some people, most people, probably thankfully for them, will not know what that's like. But sometimes you do just want to inflict pain on yourself. And this is one of those songs you pick when you want that. And it is. It's hard. It's hard going. It's tough stuff.
And especially when it's within the context of a record that I really feel like focuses on the weight that other people can hold on you, not necessarily in like a malicious way, but just the inherent tragic nature of love and relationships, and how giving a part of yourself to someone comes with like actual tangible consequences. That name line that we talked about in So Far So Fast honestly really makes me think of how in certain mythologies, how people like mythological deities had secret names, and if you spoke their secret name, you could have complete and utter control over them. You had you could make them do whatever you wanted, whatever you said. And it feel like on this album it deals with themes similar to that, and how like if you share your secret name with someone else, the power they hold over you is basically infinite. And I feel like you can find little traces of that throughout the entire record, and how you're just basically subservient completely.
Well, that's, again, we're just talking about Quiet Light. That's the theme of Roman Holiday as well, is choosing to be that for someone else. And then you go into another one of the great underrated songs in this album, Oblivions, which is about the extent to which, whether you choose to or not, you kind of become that for someone. And when you're with them long enough, you have to, it's the way you say yes when I ask you to marry me. You don't know what you're doing. Do you think you can carry me over this threshold over and over again into oblivion? It's this idea that to a certain extent, when you're with someone, you don't actually choose to do or be all these things to them. They're kind of things that you become as a product of loving them, essentially, and how so much of it is out of your control completely. And you become this helpless thing that's just bound to do these things for another person because you need them. And I mean, when I say it like that, it sounds almost abusive, but it's not. It's just a product of love. And Oblivions is a great song that really digs into that idea of all the things that you become and all the ways in which you become somewhat subservient and somewhat helpless when you are in love and committed to love for a long time through marriage or through whatever. It's telling that despite the fact that the commitment itself is so ironclad in here, you won't walk away, won't you? Which starts off as like, you're not going to walk away from me, are you? Like this kind of willing someone not to do it. then turning into you don't walk away, don't you? This idea that no, you won't walk away because you never do. You can't.
Because
You're
that's not the
stuck.
kind of person you are.
Yeah. And so it's this idea of being in place. And yet you have that refrain of, I still got my fear. You know, that idea that I can't leave. I know that what this is ironclad and we are just bound to each other forever, but I still have my fear, whether it's fear for what that will turn you into, or whether it's fear that maybe the other person will leave someday. Maybe they will decide it's over. There's so much complicated. You can interpret this in so many different ways as a song about the reciprocal nature of an intimate relationship that has been through time. And I think in a lot of ways, it's one of the best songs that Matt and Corinne have ever written about the relationship dynamic that they drive home so often.
I completely agree. Like if in many ways, if something like Quiet Light represents a part of my past that I identify with, I think that something like the Notions of Oblivions really represents my present, because I'm in the state I am right now in my life. I've had to make a whole lot of changes, not because, the person I love made me, but just because that's how life is. These circumstances that are completely outside of our control, that are completely unforeseen, that are completely changing the way things are. And you just kind of have to accept a certain sense of helplessness, and that accept a certain sense of fear that is inevitable, even though your circumstances are set into stone. Even like whether or not you are the type of person who has that kind of absolute trust in your partner is one thing, and I'm someone who definitely does. But then there's also just the innate, like, the dissonance of just knowing that anything at any point can affect you in any way, and you're just there, you're opening yourself up to an entire other person's world of problems that aren't your own, that are about to be yours whether you like it or not. And that's a scary fucking notion. That's a really complicated, really thorny, difficult thing that you have to deal with. And honestly, I think this album does a great job at trying to unpack that with a certain level of nuance, because on earlier National albums, it's sort of focused on like the sort of inherent toxic relationships that you're in with someone. Whereas this is like, it's not about toxicity, it's about inevitability, which I think is a more mature and kind of interesting concept to mine. And if you're going to do it, doing it with this sort of messy, big, ambitious kind of way is the way to do it, because it lets you have as many lenses and voices contributing to this to lend it sort of like the maximal amount of nuance that you can.
Yeah, and a big theme of it as well is the extent to which you inevitably surrender a part of your identity in the context of a long-lasting relationship. That's a big part of the pull of you as well that we talked about, but also the title track too, which explores this theme as well, this dependence and reliance, and this extent to which your waking, living life is usually, if not always, about waiting on someone else or being in the state of suspendedness because of your proximity to someone else. How long have we been here? Am I ever coming down? I need to find some lower thinking if I'm going to stick around. I'm still standing in the same place where you left me standing. And that, that the record, especially in its first half, with these strings of songs, does continue to explore and mine that sense of suspension and that sense of being untethered, essentially, that is a result of existing in that state perpetually with another person. So and then just to move to the home stretch now, we'll leave Light Years till last because that is the final song on the record for a good reason. It works well as a closer and it's a powerful song. I want to talk about my favorite song on this record, and if it weren't for the Geese of Beverly Road, this would also be my favorite National song. In fact, these two songs, this song and Geese of Beverly Road, basically mean the same amount to me, to the point where I kind of want to just get away from having a favorite, because it kind of just distracts from me talking about what these songs mean to me. They're both my favorite, and that's just the way it is. But this song is, not only does this song speak to me in a certain sense because it feels as though what it is communicating and the lyrics themselves feel almost as though they are addressed to me in a lot of very personal ways, not all of which I'll get into for both the sake of time, but also for the sake of just privacy. But also, like, I renamed myself based, not exactly
I
based on this
knew it.
song, but I chose the name that I have now, and a big part of why I chose it was because of this song, because it is a fusion of Rylan, the name in this song, and my old name, Tyler. Like, it is a fusion of both of those things. And that's why I chose it. This song's, as any National fan will tell you, this song's been around for about 10 years. It was originally written in the Trouble Will Find Me days. It was played live in that era. You can listen to a live recording of it on YouTube, played in a studio live, so with professional audio. It sounds completely different to the way it sounds now. Like, sounds much more piano ballady. Whereas this is hefty drums, these massive piano chords that sound gigantic, and this surging pace that it has, definitely accentuated by those additional vocal lines, and building to one of the most cathartic climaxes of any National song, the kind of cathartic climax they don't often allow themselves anymore. Like, the end of the song is gigantic. It's huge. And this observational lyricism that actually feels kind of quite different from the way the rest of the record is written, which makes sense considering how old the song is. It's this kind of, second person observational character study that fits in kind of with the sort of perspective of the film almost. You should try to get to some sun. You remind me of everyone. Did you break your mother's heart every time you tried to play your part? Look, it's a lot. There's a lot in the lyrics here. Again, it's very Berninger-esque. There's some obscurity, there's some abstraction, there's some obliqueness, and the lines about eating pearls and dressing blue to be forgotten. The point at which he sings about stay with me among the strangers, change your mind and nothing changes, don't let show any emotion when you climb into the ocean. This idea of disappearing into the world of people that you exist around as an escape, that's powerful, and it's made even more powerful in being contrasted with the refrain of Rylan, you should try to get some sun. Like, this idea, it's someone, looking out for you, someone sort of parentally, sort of giving you this advice to, not too strongly either, just gently to, hey, you should get some sun. You should take a little bit more care of yourself. You should do this little thing that will make you feel better. Not trying to mother you, not trying to fix all your problems, but just offering you this one little thing that you need to hear from someone. Again, as well, when it's backed up with that, there's a little bit of hell in everyone line as well. Just this reassurance that what you're experiencing is universal and doesn't make you wrong or bad in any way. It's simple, but it's fucking effective. And the way in which the song swells at the end there with those repetitions, with those gorgeous ringing guitar notes and the huge drums and everything about the ending of the song, it's hard for me not to just bawl. I've bawled a lot of times to this song and many others on the album. In fact, this is actually the National album that I've cried to the most. Fun fact.
It's close to me, yeah.
And it is just this massive moment that the album needs and feels like this form of delayed gratification almost when it hits at this point in the record. And then you're left suspended in air for the come down of light years, which I want to hear what this song means to you, Jake.
This is my second favorite National song, probably. And it's difficult to even articulate why. Part of it is just I love the way that it sounds. Like, that little piano melody at the very beginning is just that alone. The song could just be that and it would rip my heart right out of my chest. But this is, in summation, just all of the themes of the record kind of crystallizing at one point. It's one of the most minimal lyrically on the album, but just the glory of it all was lost on me until I saw how hard it'd be to reach you, and I would always be light years away from you. And this repetition of this simple sentiment, just being too far away from somebody who you think that you're so close to, whether this is a fractured relationship or a relationship that you already exist within, which I think is probably the intended context of the lyricism, the notion of it's like this whole album is taking place from within your own interiority, and this song finally acknowledges that your partner, the person that you've been thinking about and talking about this entire time, they are as infinitely complicated as all the sentiments that you've been holding in this entire time, and think the same thing about you, which simultaneously makes you closer together because of those shared sentiments, but infinitely further away from each other because you are a person who is infinitely vast and infinitely multifaceted and complicated. And no matter how many concessions you make for that other person, there is always going to be that distance between you. But that distance in and of itself is the most intimate thing that you can share with somebody because it's only between the two of you. And just the Berninger-esque fucking parts of this song where he just says, I thought I saw your mother last weekend in the park. It could have been anybody. It was after dark. Everyone was lighting up in the shadows alone. You could have been right next to me and I'd have never known. And that's just elaborating on that core theme of not knowing and something being like this simultaneous, like Schrodinger's cat of emotional volatility of it could be, but it also isn't, but it also is. And just the distance, the fucking the build, the instrumentation of this song, this is one of my most listened to National songs. When I got to this song on my first initial listen of the album, I already knew that it was an album people were split on when I listened to it, but the second I heard that opening piano medley, I was like, no, I'm firmly pro this album. I can't.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little flourish at the start of the song. It just completely hooks you. And like I said, I keep going on and going about how good the fucking piano melodies are on this record. And this is the best one of them all. It is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of instant classic melody that you're amazed hasn't been written before, or at least that you haven't heard before anyway. It's amazing. It's on the one hand, it is the kind of national ballad that they have written like at least a dozen times already, but it still feels fresh when it has that personality and that sense of intimacy to it. The intimacy is what gets me. And it's the perfect end to this record because it is a record that has been huge and it has been messy and it has been extroverted and it has been full of all these different voices and it has been a complete collage of chaotic elements that represents the accumulated experiences of a lifetime of memories and thoughts and feelings and loves and losses collapsing onto you. And then it's just this peaceful ending where all of it has leveled away and you're just there. You and the piano, or you and this person, or whoever, or even just you on your own. I like that idea of it being a song about being alone, but also like sharing an intimacy with someone else in your both being alone separately and together. It's yeah, and we talked about that theme already in other songs in this record as well. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful end to the record. And hopefully we have at this point communicated why we love this album in a way that makes cogent sense in spite of its, very confronting, deliberate ugliness. It is a remarkable record that I'm not surprised people are cold on. I'm not surprised people haven't come around on yet. It is a kind of thing that will take some years, I think, to get the reevaluation that it deserves. But I love that it inspires such diverse and passionate thoughts from people, whether they don't like it or whether they love it. It really does set people off. And so we want to hear from you in the comments below as well, what you think of this record, where you fall on it. Are you pro? Are you anti? Or are you somewhere in the middle? And why? Let's rate this bad boy, and then we can really quickly do our national album ranking if you want to as well. So Jake, your favorite tracks and rating for I'm Easy to Find.
Let's see. My 3 favorite tracks on here are, I have to go with Light Years being my favorite song on here. And very closely behind, honestly. It's not like there's a vast gulf or anything. Title track, I Am Easy to Find. And after that, I'll say, Yeah, I do have to say Quiet Light. Least favorite song, I think, yeah, the problems that I have with this on the more proper songs are epitomized into The Pull of You, which is again a song I have a lot of affinity for all of the individual parts for. And I do think it's a very good song. It's just that it also has the most going against it for me. So I will say that one, but I still very, very confidently recommend this album and give it an 8 out of 10.
Alrighty, this album's a hard 10 for Morgan, who couldn't be with us, loves this album dearly, has a lot of memories wrapped up in it. So we share and echo his effervescent praise. My three favorite tracks are very easy to rattle off. It's Rylan, it's So Far, So Fast, and it's Quiet Light. Least favorite, probably The Pull of You for exactly the reasons you said. And I give this album an 8.5, which gives us an average overall of 8.8 for the Nationals. I Am Easy to Find. Thank you for joining us for this National Retrospective. It's great to have another full artist retrospective in the can.
Yeah.
If you didn't know, we've also done full discography retrospectives in the sense that we have a full episode on each album for Björk and Radiohead as well. You can check those out on our channel too. And we may very possibly do another one of these on another artist in the future. At the very least, we have more discography breakdown single videos planned, where we're going to go through full discographies in a single video in the near future as well. So keep an eye out for that. Before we wrap up, let's do now that we've finished this series, let's do our full national album ranking. Jake, why don't you kick us off with that?
All right. Number 8, in last place, I give the debut, self-titled The National. In 7th place, I give Sad Songs for Dirty Lovers. In 6th place, I give Boxer. 5th place, Alligator. 4th place, I Am Easy to Find. 3rd place, High Violet. 2nd place, Trouble Will Find Me. And 1st place, Sleep Well Beast.
All right, for me, in 8th place, it is the self-titled. In 7th place for me, it is Sad Songs for Dirty Lovers. In 6th place for me, it is Trouble Will Find Me. In 5th place for me, it is I'm Easy to Find. In 4th place for me, it is Sleep Well Beast. In 3rd place for me, it is Boxer. In 2nd place for me, it is High Violet. And in 1st place for me, it is Alligator. So let us know your rankings of the Nationals albums in the discography below. What do you think of this entire series as well, if you've stuck around for it? If you haven't, the link for the full playlist will be in the description below. And if you enjoyed this, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel if you enjoyed it. If you want more as well, let us know what you want to in the comments below. As always, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Johnny Walker, keep walking.